the same time, that can be a factor of offensive line play being very beneficial to the player themselves.
I totally agree with you. We're going to transition now and jump into wide receivers for a couple minutes. And we obviously start with the man at the top, and deservedly so, because he has proven now multiple seasons that he is I think in all our estimation right now, he is the king of the wide receiver class, and that is Justin Jefferson. Michael, my only question to you is there any reason, how big does a league have to be for you to take Justin Jefferson in the first round?
Oh, not at all. He's the only receiver I would justify taking in that first round. But at the same time, for me personally, I would be a little bit skeptic taking him top 4. But if I don't like any of the running backs that early, I'll take him easily in the first round. So I'm not it's not so far fetched for me to draft a wide receiver in the first round if his name is Justin Jefferson, or even maybe late in the first round and then Jamar Chase. But other than those two, I wouldn't touch a wide receiver until the second round.
Yeah, I probably feel the same way, but I really don't. I think Justin Jefferson is worthy of a first round pick, but my personal strategy, I always go running back. If I'm in a snake draft, for me, it's always running back with the first pick, running back with the second pick. That's just pure habit for me.
I'm right there. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Like last year, I did running back, then I did Tyreek Hill, which paid off dividends for me in the second round. But that was the first time I ever did a running back receiver. But I typically am the running back, receiver.
And the reason I say that is because I'm the guy. You guys know I'm a big sports guy, so I'm always scouting. I'm always looking at college football players and thinking about them in fantasy. And a lot of my friends, they don't follow college football the same way, so they're unaware of some of these rookies. You can find some good rookie running backs, but I always find that those guys really play well from weeks like 1 through 10, maybe 1 through 12, but that's the length of the college football season. And that's when a Dameon Pierce or a Kenneth Walker III, they kind of fall off. But wide receivers don't have that same problem, 1. And 2, the way offenses are now, a rookie wide receiver can jump in there and do really well. So someone like a Chris Olave last year, that's somebody who I targeted, who I love. And running back, I need someone who's going to be there from week 1 through week 18. Who's just going to be consistent and deliver. That's why I double down on running back in the first 2 rounds, feeling like I can steal some talent later on with some rookies. Jackson Smith-Njigba is someone I have on my list. Adam, do you think Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be a offensive rookie of the year candidate? Do you think he's worth putting that kind of investment in as maybe a steal target in a fantasy draft?
Well, he's obviously getting put in a good situation there with Metcalf and Lockett. And whether Metcalf and Lockett, that opens up them more. If Jigba starts getting some downfield threats, I think he could definitely be up for Offensive Rookie of the Year. But I'll go back to it again. Quentin Johnston, to me, was my favorite wide receiver in this draft, and I think he got in a perfect situation with the Chargers. And that wide receiving group that he has, I think he really can stretch the field. And with his endurance that he had over at TCU, to me, he's the leader in the clubhouse for rookie wide receivers.
Wow, it's funny you say that. That isn't where I was going to go. I was going to go Jackson Smith-Njigba as either number 1 or, and you're going to hear me talk about this guy a lot over the next few months as someone you should target in fantasy, Zay Flowers. Because finally, Lamar Jackson has a talented wide receiver that they can throw all over the field, who's incredible getting out of breaks. They don't just have Mark Andrews anymore. I think Zay Flowers is a steal. He is my Chris Olave of this year as a guy you're going to get later in the draft who could prove, who could pay you back huge dividends as a fantasy owner. Interesting that you go Quentin Johnston. I like him in 2 ways. I know Justin Herbert has a big arm, and I know Keenan Allen and Mike Williams get hurt, so Johnston's going to have plenty of opportunities in that passing game. Plus, Kellen Moore, you know he's going to bring a big passing offense to the Chargers, but I'm just not as big on him as you are. I wasn't in the draft. I'm not now. Give me a quick sales pitch. Like, is it his speed? Do you like the height? Like, is that what it's about? Or do you just think the combination of OC and wide receivers around him plus quarterback makes it like a perfect fit?
Yeah, I think, well, quarterback for sure. I mean, Justin Herbert to me is a top tier quarterback in this league. It's just getting better. But the two things, like you mentioned, injuries have been the Chargers' Achilles heel at wide receiver this year. So I think him stepping in, his production is going to go up. But I just love the way that when TCU run that high-paced offense, the endurance that you have to have as a wide receiver to not only just run the short routes, intermediate routes, but the deep routes and stay the entire game. So to me, I think that he can do short, middle, or long, and that just makes the Chargers more dynamic. But his production is going to go up with the injuries because you know what's going to happen. One or two of those guys are going to get hampered, and he's going to step right in for production. So that's why I like him a little bit. But real quick, not to get away from this real fast, but one guy I want to highlight on your list, Wyatt, was down number 26, very sneaky, Calvin Ridley. I think a lot of people coming back this year with Jacksonville. Yep. So Calvin Ridley, to me, is a guy that could have huge production this year after being off last year.
That's such a great call. I feel the exact same way. I both love that you brought it up and hate that you brought it up because I was going to bring it up because you're totally right. That is a steal. He is going to have a monster year. You already know that, first of all, he's motivated. Second of all, the Jaguars' offense is great from a passing perspective and is only going to get better. They know they're going to get another year of Doug Peterson. I love everything about what Jacksonville's doing, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And Calvin Ridley, I did not give him enough credit in Atlanta because I was just kind of fading the Falcons at the time overall. He was outstanding statistically, and from a fantasy owner standpoint, he could be one of the best picks of this year if he can stay healthy. I love what he can do. And if you look at the AFC South rather, is there one good secondary in that division? He's playing 6 games against the Texans secondary, the Titans secondary, and a Colts secondary that doesn't have Gilmore anymore, that is far weaker than it was a year ago. So for a number of reasons, Calvin Ridley could get loose in one of those games. I love what you just said. I'm really high on him. I want to shift away from him for a moment to another wide receiver. This one I'm high on. I drafted him last year again. It went to my rookie strategy, and it ended up paying off. I'm curious to know if year 2 will be as successful. Obviously, he's got a brand new weapon. Michael Garrett Wilson. We're going to hear a lot about him. A lot of fantasy owners are going to talk about him, are going to target him. He'll probably go earlier in the draft than he probably should, just because everyone's going to be so high on Aaron Rodgers. Do you think Garrett Wilson's ready to be a top 10 fantasy wide receiver this year?
Yeah, 100%. I can see him as the number 10, maybe even 9 or 8 level type of receiver in fantasy. It will only help his production with getting Aaron Rodgers behind center. I think last year proved to you it didn't matter who the quarterback was for him, but when he actually gets a consistent quarterback play, and Aaron Rodgers being one of the best, I think that will only pay dividends for him.
Phil brings it up in the chat. Love Wilson, but not his average draft position. I totally agree with you, Phil, and I could not agree with you more. Great point by Phil, one of the viewers on TikTok Live, as we're broadcasting now on both Twitter Spaces and on TikTok Live, as well as on YouTube. And to your point, Phil, I think Garrett Wilson is going to have a great year, but I don't think he's actually going to be accurately valued in the draft. I think there are certain teams where you're going to get a fan of that team in the draft, and they're going to love the Jets, and they're going to draft him too early, or there's going to be someone who's just a bit too keen to take Garrett Wilson too quick, and that's why he'll go a bit too high in an auction draft or in a snake draft, and it's too bad because I think he's going to have a good year. I'd love to get him on my team, but I almost feel like he's going to be a bait. If you do an auction draft, for those who don't do it, you nominate a player and then everyone bids, obviously. And there are players I like to put out there almost as like chum to get some of the other players in my league to overspend on players so that they have less capital to go after the players that I really want. Garrett Wilson might be one of those kind of dummy players up there I put up for auction this year, because I feel like people are just going to overspend on him. But Adam, I put Garrett Wilson up against another player, and I'll ask you, who do you think is going to end up having a better year statistically? Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets or Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions? In this ranking, if you're watching on TikTok Live and on YouTube, Amon-Ra St. Brown is ranked according to ESPN as the number 8 fantasy wide receiver going into the season. Garrett Wilson is 11th. Adam, I ask you, which wide receiver do you think is going to have more production this year?
Well, to me, I would lean St. Brown. And the reason I would lean St. Brown is because I think Detroit's going to have to score more points. Their defense isn't as good as the Jets. And I think they're going to have to spread it around and do it a little bit what they did this year, score 30, 35, 40 points a game. I think Garrett Wilson's going to be a good weapon for Aaron Rodgers, no question about that. But like you mentioned, a little bit of question in the offensive line. They might rely on the running game a little bit if Breece Hall comes back healthy. It'd be curious to see what Rodgers does. Rodgers spread the ball around a lot last year. I know we had some injuries, but we didn't have any receiver over 800 yards receiving for the year. Garrett Wilson was just over 1,100 yards, which, Garrett Wilson probably is more talented than any receiver we had in the Packers last year, even with Watson and Dobbs' emergence. But I think because of Detroit's offense and what they have to do, because their defense isn't going to be there just yet, I think St. Brown is probably going to get more production than Wilson this year because the Jets defense is pretty good, and the Jets might be maintaining a lead instead of having to score 30 points to win.
What's challenging for me on this one, and Phil brings it up in the chat, Jameson Williams is suspended, obviously, for gambling or whatever he was involved in. And so Amon-Ra St. Brown isn't going to have him on the field for the early part of the year. Once again, didn't have him last year due to injury. But I actually like when a stud wide receiver has another good wide receiver on the other side. I know that may impact his targets, but I actually feel like that opens him up for greater yardage because there's less coverage there, obviously. So I actually think Amon-Ra St. Brown, while he may get more targets early on, he'll get more coverage as well. So he might benefit Phil from getting Jameson back in the lineup. I do like Goff having that continuity with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Rodgers is obviously going to have to find that groove with Garrett Wilson. Part of me would say this. I don't think I'm going to draft Garrett Wilson. I think he's going to be too expensive. What I really want to do is I really want to avoid him in the draft, and then I want to go find him in a trade. And come like early October, mid-October, I want to go trade for Garrett Wilson because come week 7, week 6, that's when Rodgers and Wilson should have unbelievable chemistry. And if I'm getting the two of them on the back half of the year where they go chase a playoff run, that could be where I get great production early on in the year. Obviously, we have to see what the schedule is. We have to see if there are games early on against good defenses or bad defenses. That obviously will play a factor. But I think Garrett Wilson is a good player to target in a trade. If you draft him, you'll probably overspend or you'll draft him too early in a snake draft. But you're going to want him from weeks 8 through 18 because once Aaron Rodgers finds a number one wide receiver, he overthrows to him. Devontae Adams, please stand up and testify. We know that's what happens. So I think that's a great opportunity there. We continue our conversation about wide receivers. And Michael, I'm curious to know what you have to say about the Miami Dolphins. Unbelievable speed. Jalen Waddle is as dynamic as Tyreek Hill is. He's just at a different point in his career. But can we trust Tua Tagovailoa? Or is that an offense that, once again, you will overspend to get the talent, but you won't get the production because of factors that are outside of your control?
Yeah, so the thing with both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle is that they did prove to you games without Tua that they can still be productive, whether it is as a vertical threat or as a screen receiver. So they can easily, in PPR, they can get you the points that you need. But it all does depend on Tua's health. And if Tua's healthy, those two can both be top 10 wide receivers in fantasy. So I think that regardless if it's Skylar Thompson throwing them the ball, who obviously is not going to be anyone good, but at the same time, if it's Skylar Thompson or Tua, I think that you can't go wrong with drafting Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle.
I don't know why, by the way, the Dolphins haven't invested in a better backup.
They got Mike White. They got Mike White.
Okay. I like Mike White.
I mean, it's better than Skylar Thompson.
No. I like Mike White. I actually think that could be a good signing.
It's better than Teddy Bridgewater as well. So the thing is, too, though, is that when you got both Hill and Waddle as both vertical threats, they can easily get you those points that you need on one catch as well. So I think that you can't go wrong with either of them. It's just the thing is, are you going to overdraft them? Right now,
the answer
Hill
is yes.
Is going to be yeah. Well, the thing is, Hill's going to be a top five receiver, I don't think you can go wrong with that. Waddle is another story. Are you going to draft himself as a top 5 wide receiver? Maybe not, but in the 10 receiver range, I'll be comfortable drafting Waddle.
I have to tend to agree with you in terms of I think they're going to be overpriced. I'm not going to go after them. I'm just saying that now. If any of the guys who are in my league, I'm just telling you now, I'm going to avoid them. We talked about Calvin Ridley. I feel like that's a great steal. Keep your eye on him. Keep your eye on. I'm also going to say keep your eye on Michael Thomas. If he can ever get on the field, stay healthy. Derek Carr being down there in New Orleans, he could be someone. People have just forgotten about him. So again, there are certain players that I like to take a risk on. We're just talking about fantasy football strategy overall. I like going after rookies because a lot of my friends don't know about college football players. So a guy enters the league, they don't really know how talented he is. You get him at a good price or good value if you're in a snake draft, and all of a sudden he goes off and everyone's like, hey, who's this DK Metcalf guy? And it's like, yeah, he was kind of a good player at Ole Miss. So something you want to consider, and I certainly have my eye on Zay Flowers. That was someone I brought up earlier. Jackson Smith and Jigba is someone I also have my eye on, but I feel like I actually may like Zay Flowers more, and the reason is I think the Ravens need Zay Flowers to be successful more than the Seahawks need Jackson Smith and Jigba to be successful. So that opportunity, I think they need a stud wide receiver, so they are going to force the ball. They're going to design schemes around him. I think that's a good opportunity. I do want to shift to tight. Go ahead.
Real quick, can I give 2 rookie receivers that I think
go for it? Love it. Go ahead.
I think Josh Downs with the Colts and Jaden Reed with the Packers.
Interesting. Adam, do you have any rookie wide receivers you want to call out?
I think Jaden Reed could be a good receiver for us because he needs a slot guy, and Cobb was 95 years old, so he wasn't going to get it done. Obviously, he's with Aaron now in New York, but I think Jaden Reed is a really good guy to slot in there. And I mentioned Quentin Johnson. I do like him. Josh Downs, I like him a lot. I'm just not sure if the production at quarterback is going to be there just yet with the progression with Richardson there. So we'll have to see how that goes. But I do like Josh Downs as well. But Quentin Johnson is my number 1 guy of this draft. I like Zay Flowers, but Lamar Jackson, I just don't trust his passing ability yet to get that done. Flowers is dynamic, but we'll see because now he's going to have a dynamic wide receiver. So we'll see if Lamar can get it done. One question for you real quick as we're just blowing through these wide receivers. We're talking about guys we like. My question to you is Godwin and Evans. Do you stay away from them now because Baker's a quarterback?
Yes.
Tommy Terrific is gone. Right? I mean, that would be my guess, right?
Not just that. I don't like the offense. So there are a couple of things for me when I'm looking at wide receivers. And Michael, we'll get to your take on this in just a second. I really care about quarterback. I really care about offensive line. I care about it for running backs. I care about it for wide receivers. I want to pick a top 5 offense. And I want to get the best players on those offenses. And whether it's Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask or whoever it is, Tampa Bay is in a rebuilding process. And so I don't trust their offense. I don't trust their passer. I don't trust their offensive line. And so, again, I'm going to use Mike Evans and Godwin as auction bait. When I'm in my draft auction, I'm going to put them up for nomination so that a couple of my friends go and spend money on them and have less money in their purse to go chase the wide receivers or running backs that I really want. And that's part of my strategy, is to get my opponent to spend the money during an auction draft so that I can get the players I want with the funds that I have. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin will absolutely be 2 of those players this year. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, so the thing was with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin is that I actually would stay away from them as well, just not only because of the quarterback production, but the inconsistency in games from both receivers and the health injuries with Godwin. It's just, you can't rely on Baker Mayfield as well throwing them the ball. Mike Evans is just too inconsistent for me throughout the years. He could get you one game with 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, but the next game he'll give you 40 yards and 2 catches. So I would stay away from them.
That finishes our conversation on wide receivers. We're going to touch on tight ends for just a brief moment.